Welcome to another episode of Planet Possible. We're really delighted you're joining us to hear evidence-led discussion about topics that are critical to the way we manage our water, nature and our climate. A huge thanks to our sponsors BMA, Arup and MWH Treatment, and you'll hear a little bit more about them later. We're really grateful for their support in bringing the podcast to you. And if you're new to Planet Possible, I'm Niki Roach. I am an enthusiastic connector of people and ideas and a fellow of CIWEM, the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management. Managing rain where it falls, slowing the flow of water, sustainable drainage, whatever you call it, there's a growing awareness that our climate is changing and our weather is less predictable. When it rains, it's often more frequent, heavier, and likely to cause flooded roads, gardens, or even properties. Here in the UK, we've seen the highest June temperatures ever recorded, and these were combined with intense thunderstorms and cloudbursts, rainfall that hits localised areas, dropping lots of water in a short period of time. So in today's episode, we're going to explore how we create homes, cities and infrastructure that can cope with these changing rainfall patterns. And to help us navigate this topic, I'm joined by not only an expert, but a champion for much of this, CIWEM's Director of Policy and Projects, Paul Shaffer. I want to start a little differently by asking you what you think the answer is to how we create places that are resilient to these unpredictable amounts of rainfall.
I don't think there is a single silver bullet for all of this. I think for me it's about the opportunity and framing it as an opportunity to make differences. One intervention could deliver multiple benefits and deliver quite a lot of other policy aspirations, whether it be around flooding, whether it be pollution, climate adaptation, and also providing better places for people and nature. So trying to achieve those is pretty tricky, but I think it requires a mixture of regulations in terms of understanding what good looks like and enabling that good practice. And then there's the guidance and the exemplars, the case studies, and then I also think there's an opportunity around bringing people along with us. So for me, the magic really happens if we're wanting to deliver multiple benefits. I think it needs multiple people, multiple disciplines, multiple organisations to be involved in that. So the magic really gets delivered when an engineer will work with a landscape architect who will then work with a community to reimagine what their local environments could actually deliver in terms of for them, but also for broader environmental benefit, really.
That's a lovely introduction, Paul. Thank you. And it kind of sets us up really for our main interview. So for that, we're joined by Cristina Refolo from RLA, and she begins by explaining the role that landscape architects play in solving this challenge.
We sit as practitioners in this key area where we intersect between design, nature-based solutions, engineering solutions. And so we're able to bring that nature-based solution within the infrastructure of green, blue urban systems. Because of our training, the way that we developed over the years in terms of how we interpret natural means to let water flow through the landscape and also make use of natural systems to cleanse, attenuate, but at the same time create amenity, which is created simultaneously in the landscape. So we are at that kind of intersection and unique position to be incredibly helpful to design these features.
Whenever we talk about this kind of stuff on Planet Possible, I often talk about everything being connected, and it feels to me like the role of a landscape architect is that connecting the dots really, and being able to see across a range of systems, bringing the civil engineers to the table, bringing the planners into the room. So let's talk about some of your really standout projects. I would love to hear in that esteemed career that you've had, what are some of the things you've really enjoyed working on and that really are kind of markers for you?
Well, I have to say my favourite project is the Water Gardens, which is located in central London near Paddington. It's an enclosed podium deck courtyard, which is 5,000 square metres, 2/3 covered by a pond, and it's owned by the Church Commissioners. Originally designed by Philip Hicks and constructed in 1960s. And because it is a suspended deck with water features, which are actually ponds, shallow ponds, it started leaking. So there was a requirement to completely waterproof it across the whole of the podium deck. And we were engaged by the Church Commissioners to refurbish the design, reconsider it from a brutalist perspective, but also what the key part of this is that when everything was stripped out of the podium deck and we had to waterproof it, we discovered that we had these enormous planters, like they were 1.5 meters deep and 8 by 8. And these planters were actually connected with the pond. So we discovered an old SuDS system which had been forgotten, had been blocked up. And it means that the water level of the pond mirrored the water level in the planter, which translated in being able to have enormous trees in there to survive, and then, all sorts of planting. So we carried on this refurbishment for over 3 to 4 years. And we introduced about 30,000 new planting species across the seasons, trees that now are enormous, mature. And so the project completed in 2020, but it was just a really fascinating example of how discovering an old SuDS system that had been forgotten brings me back to how important it is to look at history and reinterpret history with the lenses of today.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit, because I think it's really interesting when we think about the future. I remember a very long time ago a university lecturer saying to me, that the key to the future is the past, in essence, really. So it sounds like you uncovered a little bit of that pre-1960s sustainable drainage in central London. What's your experience, I suppose, more generally, of those forgotten SuDS approaches?
Going back to the role of the landscape architect in nature-based solutions. So the role is to capture water close to where it falls. And that means it's capturing through natural means and then letting it drain across the landscape, find a way to work with nature, with agriculture. So we're going back, even pre-Bronze Age, where because the settlements are a lot smaller, you can find already examples of water harvesting and collecting water, using it for irrigation, collecting it, finding a way of using it close to where it falls. Water management has always been something very much connected with religion, with climate, and with political power. Go back to ancient Egyptians. They managed to use the flooding from the Nile to irrigate and fertilize the land, the agricultural land. And so that means it's a fantastic example of natural means, making use of something that is considered a catastrophe by actually turning it around and making it an opportunity. We have to see water as an opportunity, not something to take and disperse away and get rid of straight away. So that mind shift is what's important, and using nature to do that. Other examples that I can think of is, for example, in Mesopotamia, whether the Hanging Gardens of Babylon existed or not, but that's a different sort of scenario. Here we have a very dry climate where they harvest rainwater and then distribute it across different landscapes, different green features. And that again is making the most of this opportunity, understanding the climate and then using water to counteract any problems that you may have. The other example that comes to mind is ancient India, Rajasthan area especially, where there's one of the oldest step wells. What I find fascinating is that these are inverted pyramids basically into the ground. They're about 20 meters deep. The most important one is the Bwlb, where you have 3,500 steps. And so because there the climate again is different, we have monsoons, which we don't have in the UK. That is a way of collecting a large amount of water, replenishing the water table, but also becoming something like a ritual, something that has a religious connotations. And because of these steps are designed for everyone to have access to this water. And in the hot, dry months, the water that remains in the step wells become a cooling area for anyone to access. You have deities, and the architecture is absolutely amazing. It is staggering. Going back, then to the ancient Romans, 800 before Christ, way of bringing water to the cities. So it was more like an engineering solution to that. But then, going back to the Incas, for example, 1450 when Machu Picchu was built, the human being trying to understand how to use water effectively in difficult natural conditions. And there at the top of the mountain, you can see how the permeable paving was used to let water not drain down the mountain quickly, but actually drain into the ground. And I visited many years ago Machu Picchu, and you can see these terraced agricultural gardens, which are actually like enormous planters where the soil was laid in with subsoil and then gravel and then large, enormous stones to actually keep these planters in place for agriculture. And so we can see that ingenuity, that old ingenuity, almost needs to be brought back to the present day. We mustn't forget that the old grey infrastructure has saved us from all sorts of problems. And one of the big example is in London, with the famous, the 1858, the Great Stink, when all the sewage got into the Thames. There was typhoid, there was cholera, the problems were big, and thanks to the engineer, Joseph Bazalgette, he managed to actually create these sewers, pipe all the foul water away, and so we owe a lot to the grey engineering. But things have now changed, have evolved. Now we have sanitation, medicine has evolved, and we don't need to drive water away. We can actually use it to our advantage, like they used to use in ancient times. That really is the difference between now and then. We can go back, but with a different perspective, with a different eye.
One of the things that's interesting about step wells in particular, if listeners aren't familiar with them, is that it makes visible groundwater. And actually that's something that, certainly in the UK, groundwater is this kind of hidden thing that, unless you're somewhere near a chalk stream that appears and disappears in the summer and the winter, or you're unfortunately subject to groundwater flooding, is completely invisible, isn't it? And so actually step wells are a really interesting way of recognising water resources, maybe a bit like our reservoirs, but it's groundwater, I think, is fascinating. And as you say, they're really beautiful bits of engineering, and they have what we would say multiple benefits, because there's a cooling, there's a kind of community social benefit. So it's really interesting to hear some of those stories from the past, Cristina. Thank you for bringing them to us, really. If we reflect on that a little bit, but then turn our eyes to the future, and you've just started to hint at the fact that we're now thinking a little bit differently. We're trying to think about water being managed in place rather than piping it away, hiding it, trying to move it quickly. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing. What are some of those new approaches?
So what's important now is, because space is limited and we have to integrate these natural systems within cities, these spaces need to function simultaneously, both as water management but also creating amenity and helping with ecology. And so it's about being creative in how we can use this space. For example, in the Netherlands, especially in Rotterdam, using playgrounds designed to be flooded in case of a heavy rainfall, but then also used for another way. Or you can create communal courtyards that create amenity, bring people together, but at the same time hide beneath them rain garden and reservoirs. So it is a way of bringing it all together, thinking in the long term, but also the multifunctionality of these spaces. And China, with Conjuring You, led the way with the sponge cities, how to interconnect all these spaces. Because if you have these natural water drainage systems in isolation and they're not connected, they don't actually work, as well as bringing it all together within a city. Of course, there is a political constraint, because if you have a top-down approach and you decide for the whole city at once, then it's easier for the whole country. But the connection, the connectivity, connected water system is what is really key and important. And today we have the technology and the data to monitor these more. And so what's key is almost the fact that we're bringing natural means, but we have a lot of data. So we have this advanced system of how we analyze and how we consider how these natural system works. But at the same time, we go back to the ancient way of doing things. So it's almost like going full circle, but with a different perspective.
As a global consultancy with extensive technical and advisory expertise, Arup works across the entire water cycle, with utilities, local and regional governments, commercial and domestic water users and partners. From designing and maintaining key water infrastructure services to advising on natural catchments and flood defences, Arup helps its clients consider long-term economic, environmental and social dimensions. Arup, like Planet Possible, is focused on making progress for our climate, water and nature. BMA is a next-gen AI decision intelligence software company. Their cloud-based platform, Decisio, redefines how water and energy companies approach their infrastructure planning to make better, faster and more connected critical decisions, simultaneously achieving net zero, resilience and financial sustainability. You talked a little bit there about a term that might not be familiar to everybody. You talked about sponge cities. Just give me a bit of a sense of what a sponge city is, Cristina.
Well, a sponge city is a city where you actually design natural-based sustainable urban drainage in a way that it's interconnected. So when the rain falls from one system, it connects to the rest. And then you can have all sorts of features like rain gardens and swales and ponds and green roofs. And if you're able to connect all this system together in one single unit, so you have a management train, it means that when you have heavy rainfall, the rainfall is captured and conveyed in a natural way, and it actually then is used in a way that it can be harvested, it can be used, it can replenish wetlands, and that is a system that needs a lot of planning, needs to bring everybody together towards a common goal. And often the problem is that water doesn't stop at the boundary, water doesn't stop at the development site boundary, doesn't stop at the administrative boundary, the water flows through. And it's how, as landscape architect, we have to perceive the landscape. It's not just about designing a site, but designing the wider site, because we have to restitch the landscape back. And you do that by considering the wider dimensions. A sponge city is a sponge that considers the environment as a whole and reconnects back to the natural system around it. It's not just operating as a silo, and everything is interconnected. It's like a brain with lots of synapses made of water connections.
I mean, you're painting a very positive picture, and you know I'm an advocate for sustainable drainage, so it would be remiss of me, though, not to ask you what some of the challenges are and that you've experienced as a landscape architect in terms of, are SuDS applicable everywhere? Is sustainable drainage something that we should just be doing all the time, or what are some of the trade-offs, I guess? Where is this maybe not as rosy as it might currently sound?
Well, we have to be careful to design the right system for the right place. When the water table is high, you have to be careful not to put back more water table into the system. And so you can have bioretention planters, which are, sort of higher up and, will collect water runoff from the roofs, but are not actually bringing water discharging into a system that's already saturated. But at the same time, you have to look at the soil in the area. Just because you have impermeable soil does not mean you can't have rain gardens. The water can be conveyed away into other systems and still bring that sort of reduction in heat island effect. You can create rain gardens even in clay soil where you have natural means of draining the water that create amenity, nurture the planting, and reduce the temperature around it. So it's about being clever and thinking of ways of always bringing natural solutions, but then which natural solution is right for which place. The fear is the maintenance, the cost of maintenance, because the cost of construction is not much more than the cost of creating a landscape amenity. We are not talking about complicated systems. They're actually quite easy to construct if constructed properly. The key constraint that I find is at construction stage, following the design drawings and allowing for the landscape architects to be on site to see that things are constructed the way they've been designed, because you can't cherry pick a system. If you start dissecting things, then it won't function. It is not just a planted bed, it is something that has a function, has a water management function and also an amenity function. So it's about being there, making sure it's constructed correctly. But what I like to add to that is the fear of this, the maintenance should be considered also in the wider aspect, because the more we construct rain gardens, the more we're learning how to maintain them, and the more people are acquiring skills to maintain the rain garden. The other constraint is the public opinion of rain gardens. Unfortunately, there's been horrible examples in the press where, a rain garden might have been trampled on or parked on, and then it becomes compacted and it stops performing how it should, and then that immediately goes out there and it becomes, oh no, why you have all these rain gardens. So we shouldn't let these isolated examples influence how we see rain gardens. They should be, in fact, nurtured, and I think engaging the community when you're designing and constructing a rain garden helps, because you make them part of what you're doing and you explain why you're doing that. It's actually, has been proven by research, is the most successful rain gardens are those where you've engaged all the stakeholders, including the users and the ones living next door to the rain gardens. What I'd like to add is that a key factor in terms of data is that now we have satellite remote sensing, which combined with sensors on the ground can give us real data in terms of how the rain gardens are performing. And this is something that's currently evolving. And that can can give real-time information about maintenance planning, because you can see when a SuDS feature is starting to fail, you can act immediately. So that sort of ancient natural way of managing water together with today's data management, that means we have a way of changing things for the future.
One of the things that we talked about on a recent episode of Planet Possible News is tegelvippen, but it's the whole concept of tile flipping. So at a community level, people taking up paving slabs basically in their gardens, in their own space, and replacing it with something planted. And I thought there was something glorious about that, in that it's kind of individual action that you can take very easily. It's a mini sustainable drainage feature. That's what it is. You take a bit of hard standing, a bit of paving out, and you make the space permeable, but you also create a little bit of a garden. And so I just thought that was a wonderful example of how you can make this fun as well. It doesn't need to be some corporate initiative or something that's led by government. There's a place for all of that, but actually there's also an opportunity to do something at community level that, as you say, I think that's when these kind of features really take on a life of their own, when they're adding so much more to an environment. They're doing the job for water, but they're also creating a space that people want to be in and around, and that's really exciting, I think, for me. Cristina, we always run short of time and we're doing it again, but I've got one final question for you. So you'll be familiar hopefully by now with the Planet Possible magic wand. I'm going to pass it across to you. Give it a wave. What would you want to make possible as a landscape architect in this space?
For me, it would be really great if our profession, the landscape architect profession, were involved at a very early stage of projects always. I mean, I'm not even talking about pre-app stage, but land acquisition stage, because we have that unique vision that we were talking about in the beginning of the podcast of how we can see the land beyond the red line boundary. We can actually advise on how the water could be managed on site in natural ways before buildings go in. The land was there before the area was going to be built, and therefore it works together to the benefit of all. It works together to the benefit of developers, it works together for communities, it works together with nature. So being involved at very early stage, being key drivers of this new way of designing landscapes, and starting up very early on, means that we can really lead the way towards a more sustainable future and address climate change issues to the benefit of all, really.
I think that's wonderful. I very much hope we can make it possible. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, Paul, so what are your initial reflections on what you heard from Cristina?
Love the passion. I was really excited about her talking around the opportunities, but there's quite a lot of language thrown into that. So I think I picked up on sponge cities, picked up on sustainable drainage, blue-green infrastructure. I think we're all talking about the same thing, and I think it's really important to take that forward in terms of the language that we're using as different disciplines, whether that be an engineer to a landscape architect, or what the community understands. So we've done some research through enabling water smart communities that people don't necessarily understand or realise that they have a sustainable drainage scheme close by, but they definitely pick up on the benefits that provides in terms of nicer places to enjoy through recreation, biodiversity and benefits of nature. So I think there's a challenge in terms of how we present that language and bring people together with us on that journey.
Do you think it's time for a rebrand? Because I know professionally people that work in this space will call it SuDS, so sustainable drainage. It used to be called sustainable urban drainage, then it became sustainable drainage. You might hear rain gardens, you might hear sponge cities, as you've talked about. Cristina mentioned a few, you and I could think about a few. Do we need a rebrand, I suppose, is my question.
There's new language being used in terms of managing rainwater where it lands or where it falls. That's coming through, which is lovely in its simplicity. For the last 25 years, we've been using SuDS, derivations of that. I think if we're wanting to bring communities with us, I think we probably do need to think about how we present that in terms of a language, but also a vision around what a local area will look like where you've been managing rainwater where it falls in terms of the benefits for them. So we've just come out from a bit of a heat wave. If you start presenting the benefits of SuDS in terms of providing a more local environment that's a bit more attractive, whether it be shade or there's evaporative cooling from the vegetation and the soil there, and present it as a vision for what these benefits could deliver, I think there could be greater opportunity to bring people with us. Cristina mentioned references to examples where that engagement hadn't happened. I think communities, our electorate, we need them to really help us move things forward if we're trying to convince our politicians and our policymakers that sustainable drainage is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think if there's a community pull, that's so much more powerful, isn't it? This is going to sound like I'm name dropping, but when we were in New York earlier on this year, we recorded an episode of Planet Possible, as you'll know out there, with Vincent Lee from Arup, talking exactly about that, about community rain gardens. And I asked the question, how tricky is that? And he was like, it's not tricky at all, Niki. The community want it, they get it, they see the benefit of it. The challenge is if we can't provide it in that location for engineering reasons, that's where it's difficult, is managing the disappointment. So I think if you can explain to communities what it is, and you've got a clear plan around how it's going to be managed, who looks after it, so it doesn't turn into something that then is a forgotten piece of land that looks rubbish and doesn't do the thing it's designed for, then I think it's generally a win-win, isn't it? MWH Treatment is one of the UK's leading water and wastewater process contractors. MWH offers a truly integrated design and build service that's uniquely dedicated to the water industry. With an innovative and future-facing approach, everything MWH does is guided by its purpose to shape a better world. One of the things I was interested to hear from Cristina was about the kind of forgotten approaches. She talked about step wells, she talked about the fact that some of this stuff has come from Roman times. It's fascinating. It's not all new thinking. So tell me why it feels like a new idea for much of the UK still, Paul.
Because there's been a reliance in the past on our infrastructure being buried, possibly, and using pipes in terms of that certainty. So I really enjoyed the history lesson, and Cristina took us up to Bwlb with regards to the sewers, and I think it'd be fair to say that we relied on pipes then to provide us the solutions. And I think going forward, we need something else. I don't think we should throw out the baby with the bathwater here. I just think it's about an opportunity to integrate blue and green infrastructure with the grey infrastructure we've got at the moment. And those that have been involved in championing SuDS for a while have said it's about mimicking nature. While we're trying to go back to those roots, and when we're thinking about how we can slow the flow, how we can enable water to soak into the ground, I think there's an opportunity here really just to think about how that can be integrated more locally in our towns and cities. I think it's probably disingenuous to say it's easy, but SuDS is more different than difficult. And I think where we are at the moment within our cities, I think there's quite a lot of buried infrastructure, and there's also quite a lot of opinions on how we should using our land use. So I don't think it's an approach where we can just bury our infrastructure out of mind. It's there for people to see. There's some trade-offs with regards to how we can use the land for drainage versus how we can use it for houses and how we can use it for infrastructure. And more importantly, when we talk about retrofitting, there's always a challenge around how you can retrofit our towns and cities and maintain car parking spaces. Whilst if someone's protective of the car parking space, you can use permeable surfaces that still allows water to percolate to the ground beneath, but you can park a car on it as well. So we're wanting change. Now the recognition is that we need that change to be faster, bigger and better than we've had before.
Are we making progress? And if so, where are we making progress?
There's organisations like Syria.
Not the country Syria, but Syria with a C. Just tell us what Syria are.
Construction Industry Research Information Association, and they've been involved in developing consensus-based and collaboratively developed good practice on sustainable drainage for nearly 30 years. They run an award scheme every couple of years. What's really interesting is that there's more retrofit examples coming through than there were new build. That's really a representation of the drivers are growing for different organisations, whether it be water companies wanting to keep rainwater out of their sewers and stop combined sewer overflows, whether it be local authorities wanting to manage local flood risk and deliver better places, or communities just wanting change. The drivers are now changing and are now so powerful that we are getting those better outcomes.
Positive to hear that you think there is some progress. I am interested to think whether the public have made the connection between improved river health and a reduction in storm overflows, putting sewage into rivers, and kind of managing rain where it falls? Because there is a really obvious link there between actually if we slow the flow of water down and don't put it into the combined sewers in the first place, then it won't then overwhelm those sewers, mix with sewage and overflow. But I feel like at the moment there's a big understandable push to say stop it going into the rivers at the end, but I'm just not sure if we've quite got the connection that says, and if we manage that rain where it fell, at people's households with water butts, in civic spaces with permeable paving and rain gardens and so on, it wouldn't get in there in the first place. And for me, I'd be really interested to see if we can start to make some progress on that, sort of stopping it at the beginning rather than stopping it at the end, if that makes sense, which is arguably a bit too late. Do you think, from your perspective as a practitioner, are people making that connection? Is that just my perception, or do you think there's work to do there?
I still think we've got some way to go with regards to the discussion around the water cycle. For so long we've been burying our infrastructure, and there's nothing as visible as having a rain garden outside where you can see the water levels. There's quite a big disconnect around a number of things. I love the terminology of managing rainwater where it falls or where it lands, because it also talks about opportunities for using that through rainwater harvesting systems and dealing with challenges that we're going to potentially have around water supply. But it also provides an opportunity to reduce the amount of pollution that can either go into rivers directly from runoff, and also reduce the amount of rainfall that goes into our combined sewer systems and sometimes causes overflows and spills. So I think the public rightly want it stopped. I think the challenge is the speed in which blue-green infrastructure takes to deliver. Getting that communication, getting that engagement, getting the planning, getting the regulation instruments in place to enable blue-green infrastructure to be delivered isn't as simple as it needs to be in terms of if we want to accelerate delivery.
One of the things CIWEM does is a big part of it. It's all about professional development. Are we teaching our students, our engineers, our environmentalists, our architects, our planners how to do this well? Do you think it's embedded yet?
It's definitely not embedded. I can see it starting to infiltrate in some of the courses. I think one thing that's clear is that whilst there's changes in technicalities and science and engineering for this and design in terms of landscape architecture, I think there's a whole element around culture and behaviour that we as an institution need to unlock. So this whole thing around organisations work in partnership. We've just recently launched training on partnership working, which looks at the behaviours and the culture and what we bring as individuals in terms of how we drive change, how we communicate opportunities to people to get them on side. So it's no longer just about a technical or scientific question. I think it needs to be also around critical people skills in terms of storytelling, collaborative leadership and partnership working, and engagement in terms of presenting a vision where we can deliver these multiple benefits. So CIWEM has definitely got training out there for those fundamentals in terms of the practicalities, but those critical people skills is something that we really want to address going forward.
I'm going to put you a little on the spot here. Given we said that sustainable drainage, let's stick with that term for a minute, slowing the flow of water down could stop storm overflow spills, which is a problem for water companies. Do you think water companies should be responsible for owning and maintaining sustainable drainage infrastructure?
That's a good question, right? So I think it comes down to the nature of the assets that we're asking people to look after. Water companies will definitely have a role in undertaking that. Local authorities will also have a role in that in terms of placemaking. So I wouldn't necessarily want to fall down on one or the other. My gut instinct is that I think it should be a local authority element to take forward, but I think it needs to be properly funded, enforceable, and linked to the standards. And at the moment, I don't think we've yet got that clarity. I think it's really important to differentiate maintenance from the adoption. I think we've always know what needs to be done with regards to maintenance. It's how that gets undertaken in terms of the allocation of funds. And that's part of the reason why organisations like CIWEM are so keen to see Schedule 3 enacted, because it gives strength around the standards in terms of what good looks like, and also provides a mechanism for that adoption to take place. And without that clarity and mandating of the standards and the clarity of a mechanism to take that forward, I think it's going to be really tricky. The ship may have sailed with regards to Schedule 3 and SuDS, but whatever else happens, we need to make sure there's clarity amongst the developers, their consultants, and also local government and particularly the planners and lead local flood authorities in terms of how to get good SuDS constructed and how they should also be maintained.
And just for the uninitiated into the world of SuDS, give me a 30-second, what is Schedule 3?
Schedule 3 was a part of the Flood and Water Management Act 2010, and within that it sets out the need for mandatory SuDS standards and the role of the SuDS approval body enforcing those standards and then undertaking the maintenance. So Schedule 3 has been implemented in Wales since 2019, and England's been looking over the border, some of us with envy in terms of the simplicity and clarity that provides. It hasn't been easy or plain sailing for the Welsh and the stakeholders there, but they are delivering now, moving things forward and delivering SuDS and housing at the same time as well.
Who is responsible for pushing the button to say, yes, Schedule 3 should be implemented, Paul? Where does that sit?
That's the government. That's between DEFRA, MLCLG, Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and probably the Treasury in terms of making sure that it's consistent with delivering the housing targets that government's quite keen to deliver.
All right, time is flying. So final question, you know what's coming. I'm going to pass you the now kind of semi-famous Planet Possible Magic Wand, Paul. Give it a wave and you can make anything possible. What would you want?
My magical wand would definitely be around that communication piece. I can't think of how many different terms there are for what we're talking about sustainable drainage. We need to do more to get the public along with us in terms of making sure that changes happen, whether it be for new build or whether it be for retrofitting. So I would really love us to have a communications campaign very similar to the one that may be Ofwat's funding with regards to water efficiency, trying to make sure that the public understand the value and benefit of sustainable drainage, the opportunities for it to be done with them rather than to them, and also just making sure that there's some alignment on the value and benefits for all the different organisations and sectors involved in managing water and managing rainwater where it lands.
And as somebody who has recently had their driveway with a very small rain garden on it go viral on Instagram, check out the Planet Possible Instagram if you want to see my surprisingly popular driveway. I can tell you there's definitely space for that. People are really interested in what they can do even at property level, I think. So yeah, I'm totally with you. Wonderful. As ever, time's flown by. So here we are at the end of this episode of Planet Possible. Thank you for joining us. I hope you found the conversation insightful. I hope it's given you something to think about in your world. If you don't already, subscribe to Planet Possible on your podcast app and we will magically appear in your feed. And we've got more fantastic guests and topics lined up for the rest of this year. So I hope you'll continue to join us for those. All that leaves me to say is a huge thank you to my superb guest, Cristina Refolo, our sponsors, BMA, Arup and MWH Treatment, and my wonderful co-host, Paul Shaffer. That's it, everyone. Until next time, stay curious, look for connections and imagine what's possible.